just curious to see where the council's up to, because I know there was a potential to submit an EOI. Has the council submitted an EOI for the trial yet?
Certainly, one of the things that was interesting was the New South Wales government made an announcement that they're doing an e-scooter trial in a couple of particular areas. And we had a few residents in our community who said, well, how come we're not able to do those e-scooter trials in our area? Because we have talked before around our Track-a-Riley cycleway as being a perfect location for maybe segways or e-scooters, either rental e-scooters or even just people privately using e-scooters out there. So we sent off a letter to the state government, to our local member, and asked how we could be considered for that. And they came back and said, yes, all councils could be considered. They'd be sent a letter and then we could respond to that. And so subsequently we received a letter, and that letter basically said, would you like to be part of a trial? Conditions and various requirements will be detailed later, but just put your hand up if you'd like to be considered for a trial. So, of course, we put our hand up. We don't know any details at this stage. We don't know exactly what it looks like. All we can base on is what's coming out of some of the other trials that are going ahead in July, and that's that it will only be the rental scooters, so it won't be your own private e-scooter, which obviously people do have those at the moment, but they're illegal to ride those in New South Wales. You'll have to have a helmet on, which makes sense, which I think is a good thing. And even when I've seen trials at different places around the world, or just e-scooters in general, I've ridden e-scooters all over the world, some of those locations do have it as a compulsory component that you have to have a helmet on. Other ones, they don't worry about it too much. But the ones with helmets make sense. The helmet clips onto the e-scooter, and then there's a process when you hire that e-scooter as to you've got to unclip the helmet and presumably put it on, although it's very hard to check that people are wearing it. So I think it'll be reasonable. The reaction from the public at this stage has been varied. Some people don't like the idea of e-scooters because sometimes you'll go to some places, you'll see them in rivers, you'll see them up in trees, you'll see them making a mess throughout the CBD. Other people love the idea of e-scooters because they see that as a good way to get around a community. At this stage, nothing is going to happen in Dubbo until we actually get something from the government to say that we could possibly have an e-scooter trial, and that's when we go to the community and really find out some more detail, because at the moment we really have no details. And as I said before, an example would be having e-scooters around our Track-a-Riley cycleway, I think would be a huge tourist benefit. And one of the great things about modern e-scooters is they can be geotagged, so they can be very specific in where those e-scooters will work. So you could actually geotag just the Track-a-Riley cycleway, for example, and make it limited so you could only have it in that area, or just certain parts of the community you could have it, so you're not going to have them littering up all sorts of different places. And people that hire them have to take photos and show that they've parked it safely. So it's getting much more sophisticated than some of the older examples where you did see a lot thrown into rivers or up in trees.
So I guess the thing is, well, so just to be clear, you are really pushing for this e-scooter trial to take place. Do you see it as a good thing for Dubbo?
What I'm really pushing for is to say to the government, please consider us, but give us more detail. So there's nothing, I don't see us getting anywhere in the short term, but we've got to put our hand up to at least be considered to actually find out the further details. If we don't put our hand up at this stage, then they might announce the details for the trial and we say, oh, gee, that's fantastic. And they say, well, sorry, you didn't put your hand up in the initial stage. So at this stage, what I'm pushing for is to the state government, please tell us more details. We want to find out about it, and then we can have a good conversation with our community and find out what the community thinks about it once we know the details. But we have to put our hand up at this stage if we just want to actually be considered in that. At the next stage, we'll find out what the community thinks.
And has the New South Wales government given you any sort of timeline at all? It sounds as though they haven't.
No, they haven't. And I'm assuming that they sent those letters out to all councils across the state. And then I would imagine that many of those councils would have said, yes, please tell us more details. I have no idea about the process from there. Again, we've had some brief communication with our local member, and that was really put your hand up if you want to be part of it. So we know no details. We know no timelines. We really know that if you want to be considered, put your hand up, and that's what we've done at this stage. So it's very, very early days at this stage.
Fantastic. Be interesting to see what happens in the next little while.
Well, hopefully we'll find out more information some stage in the near future, and as soon as we find out more information, we'll go back to the community and say, well, here are the conditions, or here are the specific requirements if we want to be a part of this e-scooter trial. Keep in mind that even if we said yes and the government says yes, you've still got to have a hire company, because at this stage, again, the government has not said this is for people to go and buy their own e-scooter and ride it around. This is specifically for hire e-scooters. And one of the things I'd love them to consider, although this hasn't been mentioned, but we will certainly mention this as well, is the hire of segways. And this is something that we talked to the government about many years ago, because again, having segways around our Tracker Riley cycleway would be fantastic. I can see tourism operators wanting to do that. And I've ridden on segways in places like Canberra. I've ridden on segways in places overseas, Paris, for example. I've done a Segway tour throughout the streets of Paris. I think there'd be a huge marketing opportunity, a huge tourism opportunity, having segways around the Tracker Riley cycleway. But again, at the moment, segways are illegal across the state. So there are some opportunities there. Segways or e-scooters are legal in other parts of the nation or other parts of the world. So I'm sure we could look at what other places do and more or less copy, I suppose, some of those ideas that work and some that don't. We can reject those. So there's been some time for refinement across the world. Surely we can get something that works really well in our community.
Absolutely. All right, awesome. Well, thanks again, and all the best.
Thank you, Scott.
Cheers, Matt.